everyone, and welcome to People Matters, a diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion panel that's brought to you by Dojo Live. My name is Kim Lantis, and I'm joined by America Guerrero. And
Hello, everybody.
And we're really, really happy to be your moderators today. So before we introduce the panel, I just want to give you an idea of what this show is about. So here at Dojo Live, we really do try very hard to understand the value of diversity, knowing that every human experience and background offers a unique perspective. So last month, we introduced our very first People Matters, and that was LGBT in tech. And that perspective was explored on our first panel. And if you didn't catch it, don't worry. You can still see that on our website, right? Go to Dojo Live. Now, July is Disability Pride Month. And for our second panel, we'll be pushing further into the equity and inclusion component. And so we've invited a special panel of individuals to discuss accessibility, right? And accessibility as the future of tech. They'll be answering questions of how accessibility and inclusion are a competitive edge. And we really, really look forward to learning from you all. So welcome. America, if you would like to kind of introduce our guests here.
Yeah, this is so exciting. Today we have Jennifer Porzel, lead product designer at Gamefort, and then we have Estefania Naya, UI UX designer at Incora, Fermin Chavez, who is UX researcher at Incora. We would love to get to know you guys. Please share with us about your experience, about why you are here, you want to share to the world why accessibility is so important. So please go ahead. Let's say Estefania.
Cool. Dang it. I made eye contact. I looked at the teacher. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, it's okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Estefania. I'm a UI UX designer here at Incora. I have more or less 3 years of experience. I have a BA in graphic design, and I started my journey as a curious person like that. So I've been that person which is asking always why and always wanting to learn from others. So yeah, I think a collaboration, it's been crucial for me in my career, and I think that's why I'm here. That led me to you guys, and everything that I can learn, it's great for me. So that's about me.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Who's next? We'll go with Jennifer. So you are, she's like, tell us a bit about you and what led up to product design.
A lot. Well, my history's an MFA in sculpture, of all things, and then education. But really what led me into design is just dealing with too many products that didn't fit my needs and needed help. And I thought I could do that. I could make this better. And so I dived into it out of curiosity, much like Stefania. So just kind of went in, and now I am a colorblind designer, which is interesting to explain to people. So yeah, it's just something that I can pour a passion into in making everything better.
Wow. And I think that, being colorblind probably offers an extremely unique perspective in your ways. I think personal challenges in what you do, but ultimately, I'm assuming, will even make your designs better. And I'm really excited to dive into that. And of course, last but not least, Fermin.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's currently raining very, very hard, so I hope my microphone doesn't pick up on that, and my internet connection.
We hear you good, and if you disappear, we know what happened.
The rain took me. Okay. My name is Fermin. I'm originally an engineer. I did my bachelor on bionics engineering, like Bionic Woman. That was also my reference when I picked it. And well, naturally, we would design and build things for a lot of people with disabilities. Like they are the main users of prostheses and similar things. But I was always kind of uncomfortable in the way we approached the whole thing. And I ended up moving into design and the user research space, because I was like, I don't feel we're asking the right questions, or I'm not sure we're building the right products for them. Like there's this whole notion of what we should do, but nobody ever verified with the users. So yeah, it was kind of like that. And I've been doing research for 4 years now. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. And so let's kind of get right into it. This Q&A kind of conversation that we've got. So as I was preparing for today's panel, I came across a statistic, and this statistic actually surprised me. And that is, according to the CDC, and I don't know what year this is. It's on their website. I'm guessing it's recent. 61 million adults in the United States are living with a disability. And that means 1 in 4, which blew my mind. I was ignorant to that statistic. And I guess that statistic alone sheds, I think, a lot of light on why accessibility is important. But to get us started, if you could just tell us, what is accessibility and why is it important, and particularly in tech? Thank you. We're not gonna call them names no more, guys. So let's just talk.
Okay, cool.
I would say it on like a base level, like when you're creating something and you're putting it out there, you want as many people as can be possible to utilize that tool or that product, or however you're pushing it. And that's the base of it, really, is it's more people to have access comfortably using that tool or product. After that, I mean, we can get into the nitty-gritty of, like, we're talking about supporting people, giving visibility and all of that as well. But when it gets down to it, as producers, we just want to make sure we're producing for everybody who is out there. And
Nice.
that's my view of it.
Yeah, I think there's the two-part component, right? There's, let's say, the morality issue.
Yeah.
And then there's the money issue that nobody wants to talk about, but it's a truth.
Unfortunately, yeah. And like, I can scream my socialist heart out about it, but at the time, I've got to work for a company that makes a product for people, and
Nice.
that's where it comes down to.
It makes perfect sense. What's your take for me, Stefania?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think there's two ways to approach it. Like, you can think of it as the people you are including in your user base, and think of it as the people you are excluding from your user base. And I think there's the importance of tech in particular, because we live in a very techy world. Like, everything, like what we're currently doing, depends on a lot of technological systems, and it's become commonplace right now. Like, having video conferences and remote working and everything else. Like, there's a whole lot of infrastructure that needs to be accessed for almost everyone to just lead a regular life, have a job, go to school, get healthcare. So as people working in tech, I think it's very, very important that we don't leave anyone behind. Like, it's not just about who we are considering and our niche market, but about who we are excluding without even meaning to sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that every user is facing challenges due to demanding context, right? So I'm agree on the fact that we want to design for all ability levels, and we want to create services that everyone can use. So sometimes we tend to get into the place in the catch all term for designing on technology, but it's just sometimes it's framed on charity alone. It's something like it happens, but it's not like it's something that we should like encompass and understand. Like, if we tend to watch for accessibility, we are watching through the future, I would say. So that's my take on that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think what I understand you saying is there is the charitable side, the human side, but as Fermin was saying, this tech is the future in and of itself, and therefore accessibility is deeply involved in the future of tech. So I think, Jennifer, you touched on this a little bit, but let's talk about a bit more why accessibility should matter to companies. Now, I know that all of us here are sort of involved in the tech side. You, Jennifer, with Game Board, it's a physical game board, but it involves a lot of tech. So let's talk to that. But why does accessibility matter to companies, and what's maybe the competitive edge of getting on top of this as terms of, beating your competition?
Well, I mean, really, it's just lubricating that access to everybody. So the more accessible the product, the more it's going to affect the bottom line, and it's just going to get more out there. And with game board, like, we're in gaming tech, and gaming tech can be a really harsh environment for disability. Just look at any Steam games out there, just general AAA releases, things like that. There's accessibility issues in almost all of them. And where I find the most help with accessibility and the most accessible products as far as games go, it always ends up in the independent developers. It's very trendy in those, and then like simple casual games as well, which is really surprising. So you're getting a lot of these like younger developers, younger product makers, and they're the ones pushing this forward. And if you go behind, if you land behind on this, and a lot of the big studios are, it's just going to end up hurting their releases. It's just going to end up hurting who's buying the product, who's feeling comfortable playing the product, and who's continually using the product. So with game board and everything, we're really dealing with a lot of that, and we're a young startup. We need to sell to as many people as possible, and that's the reality of it. And accessibility from the ground up is basically a core of that.
Love it. Fermin, Estefania, no, I really do. And we're going to get into the specifics, I think, of how you're making things more accessible with this next question. But Fermin, Estefania, what do you think the competitive edge is specifically for companies and accessibility?
I think it's there's a lot of arguments you can make towards accessibility, and it depends. I think you end up tailoring them to your public and your company, because there's like the bottom line, there is more people, there is more money in that if you cover a larger market just by giving access to a larger number of people. But there's also, I guess, more. There's a carrot, there's a stick. And when it comes to the stick, I think I'm thankful that we live in countries that have some legal groundwork where people with disabilities can say, you know what, this product is not working for me. That constitutes a case of exclusion, discrimination, especially when it comes to basic services like communications, telecommunications. And I'm glad we have that, because it gives them voice and power, and they can say, you know what, there's this thing, and I'm being a victim of exclusion or of discrimination. They can sue you. And I don't like threatening people or companies or anyone, but it's good that we have that. I mean, it may be a sort of last resort argument, but it's like, if you don't do that, you are gonna face legal consequences.
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
You need to be aware, and you have the legal background. So
Yeah,
and I think there's a lot of other like opportunities to improve the businesses. I can count like 4 like most important things that you can have when including accessibility in your product, systems, software, etc. You can like you mentioned before, you can strengthen the brand. You open the conversation with the users. You also reach to them, the ones that they're not like being listened. You reduce these legal complications that we talked before, and also you improve in terms of websites. We improve the SEO and the structure of the site. So there are many ways accessibility can like impact you in a very helpful and good way.
Okay, and based on your experience, what are the disabilities, limitations, or constraints that you take into consideration when designing a product? Is there an order of importance? You said listening, and if so, how do you determine the order?
Ooh, I would like to take this.
Go for it.
I think it's a tricky one, because I wouldn't like to suggest that there's a prioritization of different minorities. That's an awful thing. But I think it depends on your product, and you have to look at your product, because different products engage different aspects of our corporality, of our minds, our senses. And depending on that, they have the potential to exclude whole groups of people. And I would say that for user interfaces, web design, app design, they are still, sadly, a very visual product. So perhaps the most vulnerable people to be excluded by them are people with visual impairments. And it's a common practice, I think, in the industry that you test with them first if you want to ensure accessibility, because they are like the most vulnerable people when it comes to visual interfaces. But again, it's not about different minorities competing with each other. It's just about you looking at your product and thinking, okay, who might I be excluding when I do this or when I do that? And it's different for every product. I would love to hear from Jennifer, because it's a hardware product.
I was about to agree with you. Like, that's exactly how I approach it as well. And everything you said is directly on point with my views as well. It's hard to rank it because, as Fermin said, like, it's what's important to that product. So, I mean, I'll hark on game boards some more because that's my job here at Game Board.
You go.
Basically, like, we have our main standpoints that make the product what it is, and that's physical interaction and visuals. And so we mostly focus on ocular disabilities and mobility disabilities a lot as well. And that includes like loss of digits, MS, all of that type of thing. So we're dealing with building a whole brand new gesture library because we have this whole above the board system where it recognizes all sorts of new levels of touch. But if you're limited on what you physically can do, you start to basically take everything as simple as you can get it. I like to tell our teams here, like, if you can't do it with 3 fingers or less, we're not doing it. And most of the time they listen to me. I wish they listened to me more. But we're dealing with a situation where we also want to get things out quickly. So we're going to be doing a lot of backtracking. And then as somebody who's like, I'm partially colorblind, so I'm visually impaired a little bit. Not as much as like a fully colorblind person, but like I have tripped anomaly, so I'm automatically designing for tripped anomaly. And that's also very much high on the list, is differentiating shapes, because you're playing, it's a lot of real-time interactions. And those are important to Game Board. So those are what we shoot for first. And then like the third thing that we really push for is neurodiversity, and that's because of our user base in tabletop gaming and stuff like that. There's a lot of representation for people on spectrums of various different neurodiverse existences. So yeah, we have a lot of ADHD issues with design that people don't think about, and these are these invisible disabilities. So those are also very important to how we're approaching everything. I think I answered that.
I think it's interesting. Like, you mentioned ADHD, and like, not only is it less thought about, but you think about individuals who might not even realize that they have ADHD.
Yeah.
Who are
it's
playing,
the most
right?
underdiagnosed neurological thing out there. So.
And in your case too, or in a lot of cases, maybe not so much on apps, right? But a game board, you also have to think of age, I think, which is interesting. I mean, maybe certain games or whatever have their, recommended age limit or minimums and things like that. But something that a kid can play and that like a 90-year-old can play and everything in between.
Yeah. And the games have their individuals, but when we're talking the OS and everything, like, we want all the people in those age ranges of the games to be able to use the OS and get to those games. So it's a huge wide breadth of an audience.
Yeah. And for example, you shared that you have these questions. If you cannot do it with 3 fingers, we cannot go for it. Are there other top questions that you do yourself so you can design and develop a product for everybody? Top questions, top 3 maybe?
Checklists. What are the questions you ask?
I would mention 3 questions that I will always ask when designing for accessibility is who is using it. Am I looking at the right user? Am I looking with the right eyes? The observation on how it's being used, if this is something that already exists. And I also keep track of the user expectations. What are the things that they expect to do with this, and how can I reach those goals? That would be my like approach to that.
Yeah, I would mention that there's like this collective called Project Inkblot, and they have an online guide for designing for diversity, and they have like a set of 5 questions that you should ask yourself. And I don't think there's time for the 5, but just to mention the first 3 is like, what is your worst case scenario and on whom? How do the identities within your team influence and impact your design decisions? And the third one is, who might you be excluding? And it's a very generalistic approach, but I think it's a very good one to make you think about like the big picture stuff, because sometimes you get lost in the details of your product. But I guess I would also mention that there is sometimes I hear these questions like, oh, is there a checklist, a guide, or something? There's a lot of things, but I don't think anything substitutes building empathy by real contact with your final users, especially these populations we are talking about, like people with disabilities, old age, children, etc. Nothing substitutes for that. Like there are guides, and you can ensure a certain compliance that it may work with them, but nothing it's compares with, go and ask them.
I hear the researcher in you. Go and ask. uh, yes, perfect.
Okay. Do you have another questions, Jennifer, that you asked yourself, for example, on game board?
Oh, I mean, yeah, we have very specific ones that I make all of our game developers go through and everything like that. And one of them I like to champion is just a grayscale check. So when you're converting any graphics or any media into grayscale, you're going to start to notice colors that have different values. And if that contrast in values is not there, then everything just becomes the same. And that's the quickest way to check your colors for most colorblind individuals and stuff like that. And in gaming, that's usually one of the primary issues that we see the most is color accessibility. So that's one of the main questions I ask. I also ask if anything is detracting, and that's for our neurodiverse audience. So like animated backgrounds, things like that. Like, is this necessary to the experience? If it's not, cut it, because it's just going to detract from people attempting to use the product. And it's such a minor thing to think about. And like, as designers, like, we want to make everything beautiful and elegant and everything like that. But like, when you're adding and adding and adding, people don't usually think about that. It becomes overwhelming for a lot of people. And we want to avoid that. And it's just like, we just get bound to that. Is this necessary? If it's not necessary, cut it.
Yeah.
So that's like a huge question.
Oh, okay.
It's a really interesting question. And I think it comes down to, I think that's probably a really tough one, because when we're passionate about something and we're really like something, like we want to push for it. And then to like make yourself be like, let's do minimum viable here. It's not necessary. It looks great just like it is. Like, control yourself. I think there's, in some ways, like you said, some willpower. But at the same time, going back to a competitive edge, that question of, is this necessary? Does it need to be here? Can help you move faster. It can help you move cheaper. So, I mean, not just in terms of accessibility and equity and inclusion, but there's a business element to that as well.
Oh yeah, MVPs are massively important. I mean, that's basically why we're here. So yeah, ditto to that.
Okay, so we already talked about the top questions. What about the methods? About how do you utilize any out of the box methods to tap into your empathy when designing, like using your product with just one hand or wearing sunglasses?
Or like the grayscale, or the 3 fingers. Which
Exactly.
3?
I remember back in my school, we used to have a leg prosthesis race. Like each student would design its own leg and we have a race. I think by the time I arrived, my generation, we didn't get that. I'm glad
There
for
were
that.
too many accidents, and the school's like, yeah, we're not covering these medical bills anymore.
Maybe, but I am kind of glad because there's a lot of approaches like that, like blindfolding yourself or things like it. I think there's a good intention in them, but for most people, I don't think. For me, it's impossible to comprehend the lived experience of someone that has had this all of their lives or most of their lives, and it doesn't compare. But there are certain tools and shortcuts. I remember when I started working with people with visual impairments, I was mystified by screen readers. Like, oh my God, what is that? How does it work? And usually they set them up to talk really, really fast, to move through the interface in a I don't know, the way you would want to move through the interface. And it's like being bombarded with voices, and most of us that are not used to them don't really understand them. As like, I don't know what is happening. It's magical what you're doing with your cell phone. But I started realizing that I needed to understand the underlying thing, and now I have it on my phone. I know how to turn it on and off quickly, and I've never been a proficient user. There's a lot of intricate gestures for it, but you can do the basics and like left and right and see if every element is tagged. The clickable buttons are clickable. It works or it doesn't work, and it's a very basic approach to come to an understanding, but it's a first step, I would say.
One of the things that I usually do is to try to navigate in talking about uh, websites, right? Try to navigate through the keyboard. Also, try to use the voiceover control feature on my Mac to explore or navigate the site. Um, that way, I can check for the structure, the navigation, if to identify if the labels on the site are all right, or we can identify a lot of things on the focus order elements just by doing this quick like navigation through the keyboard. I tend to start there, but yeah, I think that it's important to move from like the part of the education to the action, so we can like try to convey this activity with our like stakeholders as well, to bring up these concerns into meetings and to like have this accessibility section on your Confluence document, or to have like accessibility reviews meetings weekly, maybe monthly. So yeah, there's the way I reach to start thinking about accessibility on the products.
Really cool. Thank you. So Jennifer, I know that you recommended, with Game Board being uh, early in the startup, and you as a company really taking accessibility into consideration from the very beginning. Then there's other companies who maybe have been around for a really, really long time. And because of, like we talked about earlier, legal reasons or whatever it might be, are just kind of tapping into accessibility with products that already exist. Given these two situations, like what maybe some types of tips or recommendations would you have to get started in the creation of more inclusive products? Like, is that process the same no matter where you are at in your process? Or if we've happened to open somebody's eyes today and say, hey, yes, I need to get on board with this, where would we start?
I mean, audits. You start with audits. Just audit everything. That's really the biggest one, and then listen. Like Fermin was talking about how like we have all these tricks and stuff as designers that we can do as able-bodied people, but as soon as we get it in front of somebody who actually has these disabilities we're trying to design for, it's going to open our mind to what's actually happening. And so auditing and getting it in front of people is the best thing you can do. That will give you an idea of where to start, but really, like, I say I do ground up, because if you plan for all of these things from ground up, then you don't have to make a performance of changing it later. You're not doing that charity thing that we talked about earlier. So like charity is good and all, but like they don't want to be made a big deal out of. I know as a colorblind person, I don't want to be made a big deal out of. Like, oh, cool, you finally support me, yay. So like band-aids are not great if you have to go back and revisit your app or your program or your website. Like it's best to do a proper design revisit, do a V2, a V3, or anything like that, and just really focus on what does this need to look like as a new product, as opposed to slapping on shapes for color recognition and stuff like that. It doesn't always work as well as you'd think it would, and the time spent testing and fixing that with that band-aid could have just been done with going from taking all the same copy and imagery and just redesigning it to fit those accessibility issues. It's also going to create a better product because you're not going to have all these settings and all of these things that people have to change on their own. If people can approach it right out of the box, that's always going to be better than slapping on all these extra things. So my recommendation would be to basically start from almost scratch. It's unfortunate, but that's the best thing to do.
Here in Mexico, and maybe other Spanish-speaking countries as well, but there's a saying that says, lo barato sale caro. Like the cheap ends up being expensive.
Yeah.
And I think we've all experienced that, right? In our homes, or trying to like, or we say in the United States to Jimmy rig something or Mickey Mouse it.
Yeah.
You might have, it doesn't always work out. If you just done it right the first time, you'd see that. I love it. It's a really good example.
It's like, I think, like a technical debt, as I say it, because you will be doing these efforts later on. Why don't we do it from the beginning, right? Yeah, I agree on that.
Cool. All right. Well, we've actually made it to the final end of our half hour, or actually gone over half hour a little bit. That's okay. We're still in our goal here. And thank you so much for your expertise, and thank you so much for your guidance. This last question is a question that's really just for fun, and that is, what is your favorite, craziest, most fun example of how you've seen accessibility applied? This can be in a product or something that you've worked for, or just something that you've seen out there in the world and thought, this is amazing.
I want to go first because, oh my God. Some years ago, I participated. It was an open contest to design a public restroom. It was going to be for a university, and the details were like, we have these 3 available spaces. You can design for whichever one you want. And my team was like 5-6 people. We included people with different disabilities. We interviewed a lot of people with disabilities, people with children. Like, taking your child to the bathroom is a whole thing. And I did not know that.
And you have to do it at every public place you go. Believe me.
Yeah,
it's like freaking Disneyland for kids. I swear. They like enjoy using public restrooms. It's so weird.
Yeah, and it's a whole thing. If the bathroom is not designed for it, it's it can make the experience awful. And just like your kid being able to fit inside a stall with you or not, to be able to reach the everything. And I thought we were very thorough in our design. The final event is on. They are announcing the winners. We got a honorable mention. Wonderful. We were very happy. And then they announced the winner project. And it was this bathroom. One of the spaces was actually divided into 2. Like, you see, like, sometimes behind the elevators, one floor is for women and the next one is for men, something like that. So it was a 2-floor space. And they won. And their design didn't have anything to cover the distance between the floors. And we were like, how did this happen? Like, there were stairs on there, and we were mystified. We could not believe that. And it was very, very funny.
So that goes into the crazy camp of like, what? We'll just say it was nepotism, and somebody on that team knew somebody, one of the judges. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, and we tried, like, we chose a space that was accessible, because you can make the most accessible bathroom, public restroom in the world, but if nobody can reach it, then what's the point to it? And that was exactly the problem with the final winner. So it was mind blowing
Interesting.
for us. Yeah.
I'll have to ask you later on. We'll talk, Fermin, about your child parent friendly restroom. I'm excited to hear about this. All right, Stefania, Jennifer, what are your favorites that you've seen out there?
I would say like I've been like watching a lot of videos from people that it's going to Disneyland. They approach accessibility in a really curious and amazing way. They have like options for everything, and I find it great. I'm eager to investigate or research more about the Disney thing going on in accessibility. It's amazing.
Yeah, hit up Cora. You have to go to Disneyland. It's job related.
I have to. I do.
Jennifer.
I would say there was, when I was an educator at a private institute, we visited a lot of art classrooms and stuff just to kind of build the program and stuff like that. And we were starting after school programs and all that. And there was one teacher at a disability school who had their entire art classroom designed for blind, mute, deaf students. So all combinations of those three, it was all within this one classroom, and it did everything they possibly could to make the students feel as independent as they possibly could. And like they used bump mats to make paths of different like bump patterns around the room. They had all these different things, and it was done like dollar store style because it's education, so very minimal budget. And it, like, this teacher just went to the extremes to make this as independent as possible, and that was just fascinating. Even as somebody with visual, like the colors and everything, it was just an amazing process. And like I went out of that visit with that teacher just being absolutely amazed. So that's probably the one that just stood out. And it was like toy, like there were honkers on desks, so you'd hit the honker for assistance and stuff like that. It's just like crazy stuff, especially for the mute students and everything. So like to get attention, and there was bells on things everywhere, and it was just playful because it was for kids, and at the same time just like really well thought through.
Wow, amazing. Thank you. And I think that taps into, I believe it was you, Fermin, and empathy, like, which is maybe the crux of what we're doing here with accessibility. I feel like this panel could go on and on and on, as it should, because as we've established, right, accessibility certainly is the future. I think no matter where we are, if it's a restroom or a classroom, Disneyland, or with tech. And so I really do want to thank each of you for a really great show, for sharing your stories, your expertise here on Dojo Live and with our audience. You truly are helping us to become better authors, think of our own stories and the stories of those around us. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. It's amazing.
And for our viewers out there, we can catch our regular show every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 12 o'clock Pacific. And be sure to follow us on all social media to catch more People Matters panels like this one. Thank you again, and we'll catch you on Monday for our recap show, 12 o'clock Pacific. Stay safe, everyone.